Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Choi, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development. We're located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. And you?
I'm doing great. Well, I want to thank the listeners for tuning in. And today on the Voice of Yoga, we'll be talking about personal power and the importance of the ego in spiritual development. So is ego friend or foe? So, Swami, my question to you to get us started is, how can I have an ego and then still be spiritual?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because it seems like in a good portion of the spiritual community today, ego has actually become the enemy. And that can become really problematic, because physics tells us that matter can't be created nor destroyed. So to try and get rid of something isn't even possible. But if you understand, the way that we approach spirituality is that you have to build from strength. You have to focus on, what is there. And in order to do it successfully, you have to realize that it's not about eliminating your sense of self, but it's realigning your sense of self with a different source of sustenance. It's redirecting personal desire or personal interest into an energy field that will expand your field of awareness. See, the problem isn't my sense of self. The problem is what my ego is drawn towards. It's what I desire is the problem. And the intention of religion in its original format and yoga in its original format was to relink the individual with a different source of sustenance. And so it's not about stopping or annihilating my sense of self. It's about me desiring something different that is going to change who I am. Mm-hmm. Because I liken it to, the term in religious communities is conversion. And back in the late 70s, there was this gas crisis that we were experiencing, and gas became very expensive. So a lot of people bought these conversion kits for their gasoline-driven engines to convert them to diesel. So they were actually going to use a different fuel to run the car. And that's, to me, the way that I understand this conversion in religion. In the Old Testament, it was called a new covenant. But you don't lose your sense of self. But what you have to do is you have to separate from your desire for one energy field and reconnect to a different one. So it's not something that's very passive. And it's also not something that you can just do intellectually. Mm-hmm. That you literally have to change the reward circuits in your brain. You have to change the neurological pathways that we have come in with, the pattern of our bodies. But once you desire this other energy field, the void or the nothing, then things really start to change. Because you don't understand personal power until you do make this connection. Because we're drawing off of a source of sustenance that is very limiting initially.
Mm-hmm. Well, how can, or I should say, when can the ego be a foe as opposed to being a friend? I mean, what is it that we have to look out for?
Well, the thing that you want to understand is that desire is not a bad thing. And that was one of my experiences with religious communities, was that people were trying to stop desiring. Which again, that's impossible. Mm-hmm. You can't do that. And then, of course, if you're trying to do something that you can't do, it becomes very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, you think, well, if I didn't have this desire, if I didn't have this sense of self, I'd be okay. But now you're working against the force that you actually want to befriend. Because desire is where power begins. Our physical bodies, have all the power of preservation and survival. Now, the problem with our bodies is they have all the power, but they have no vision. They have no discernment. We can desire anything. And then, of course, depending on what it is that we desire is going to determine our outcome. Because one of the things that we have been saying in these shows, if we desire particles, we will be of a lower animal nature. If we desire waves, we will be of a human nature. But if we desire the void or the nothing, we will become of a divine nature. And so a big part of a spiritual practice is, the first order of business is you've got to figure out what energy field am I drawing from. Because that will bring you to the physics of spirituality. Like attracts like. If you draw from one of the dualistic dimensions, particles or waves, you will be of a limited sense of self. But if you draw from this indivisible unified field, this realms of truth and wholeness, that will impregnate the seed of your mind. And the whole thing is that the term is called apotheosis, this process of the human becoming divine, is that benefits start to show themselves almost immediately. Because somebody that is drawing from this energy field doesn't have to try to be virtuous. That you're drawing from truth and wholeness, you're drawing from the realms of goodness. That becomes your characteristic by nature. And so when is the ego the enemy? A lot of times it is as if it desires one of the lower realms. When does it become your best ally is as if it desires this other source of sustenance. And part of it is really trying to figure out how to interpret the scriptures, because the religions, they're all saying the same thing, but they do it in different ways. Jesus said it very simplistically. He said, you must love the Lord thy God with your heart, your soul, and your mind. Then, of course, from there, you can love your neighbor as yourself. The Buddha said it differently. The Buddha said the same thing, but he said you must desire nothing. So part of it is being able to make the connection that, what is God and what is nothing? And, I think the discoveries of quantum physics was the thing that kind of connected the dots for me. Because what they discovered was underlying matter was energy, and underlying energy is the void. This indivisible, unified field where everything is happening simultaneously. And of course, where did it all fall apart? And in my opinion, was with the split between science and religion. Where our sciences became totally empirical, and they said that anything that isn't verifiable through the senses has no validity. And with that, our religions conformed with the materialistic mentality of our sciences, and we started to substitute this intellectual, devotional mirage for spiritual reality. And what I found to be even more interesting was that the split between science and religion came from the church. That it was the church that started to persecute the early physicists who had basically, said, hey, wait a minute, spirituality isn't magic, it's physics. It's like attracts like, and two things can't occupy the same space at the same time. Mm-hmm. So now, with the programs that we have developed and the way that we are introducing spiritual development to people is that it isn't a belief system, but it is a pragmatic, scientific, for lack of a better word, experiment of, try it, see what happens when you do it.
Well, I think our listeners might be wondering, well, how can I go through my everyday life? I have to get up, I got to get ready to go to work, I might have kids I have to get off to the bus. I have to do all of these things in my life. I have to go to work, I want to be the best worker I can be. And with that, how does a person get through their daily routines and schedules and do things that they have to do to survive and still be spiritual and still have their ego in place, in a positive way for their own development? Does that make sense? Yeah,
actually, the way that this works, because if you really cross-examine it, it really translates into a practical guide for highly effective living. Because the human being is most proficient when we are in this expanded sense of awareness. And that's what the connection does for us.
Okay,
when matter and mind... Go ahead.
So how does a person know that they're in that heightened sense of awareness? We might, a lot of people have to go to work every day, and they may have to, maybe they're selling something, or, maybe they're in the stock market and they have to work around, work with, money and things like that most spiritual people think is a bad thing, to have to, want money and have to deal with things that deal in sales and trying to get people to buy things and so on and so forth. So I think some spiritual people think that, well, you can't be in that line of work and still be spiritual because you're turning to a substance of money, and I think money to a lot of people is a sign of greed and has all these other negative connotations to it. So if somebody who works in those kind of environments, they may be looked at, that they're not on a spiritual path because that's the kind of work life that they've chosen. And so how can those people be, how can those people feel that they have this sense of connectedness and that sense of awareness?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to, what we've been saying. I mean, the first order of business in being spiritual is you have to recognize that it's not about your conduct. It's all about what it is that you desire. because when you have the benefit of what we'll call a resource-based economy, when your sense of self is totally established based on a relationship with your number one need, with the force right now that is supporting your life, that is given to you freely and in abundance, and you feel connected to it, now it doesn't negate the relationship that you have with money or any of your, I want to say, unnecessary dependencies. It doesn't negate it, but it makes it smaller. See, the true spiritual state isn't that you're in some sort of trance and you're disconnected from the outside world and you're pretending to be doing, something different than what you are doing. That when your sense of self is totally established in a relationship with the forces that are really important to you, with it comes a sense of calmness, confidence, and clarity. You're at your optimal position of performance when you're connected to this source of sustenance. Most of us, we never get out of the limited perspective of seeing ourselves as separate. In fact, what most of us call normal behavior, I call neurotic. Where we're drawing from this limited source of sustenance, we're drawing from the outside world, and we go from the car to the phone to the computer to the television to the refrigerator to the gym, and it's all driven by fear. It's all driven by this blind need for, I want something to validate myself. See, with the internal connection comes a different return. Matter and mind come together with new information. And you're not going to just see yourself as a separate entity, but you will see yourself as an intricate part of something bigger. Does that help? Or?
It really does bring some clarity. What I want to do, though, is I want to come back to that, but let's pause for a few moments to hear a word from our sponsors. So listeners will be back in a few moments.
If you are looking for a samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Starting with the separation from mother, including the labors and tasks of the hero and the return as a whole person. Practice makes perfect only when practice is whole. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. Samadhi, or total consciousness, is experienced by knowing and doing with devotion. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Well, welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you are listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I hear what you're saying about all of that, and so basically, people don't have to, give up what they're doing right now as far as their physical world, their work life, their, family life, whatever, to find this, to be on the spiritual path. We don't have to live in a cave and eat berries and leaves. We can still do what we're doing, and it's just our perception of spirit and the importance of breath to bring that awareness to it. That's what you're saying is where it all begins. Is that right?
Well, to answer your question, there is a lot that we have to do. We do have to separate from our attachment to the outside world and reconnect to something that's invisible and intangible. That's not an easy catch, and that's where you're going to need a metaphysical or a mystical system. That's why in their original formats, and in its original format, yoga, they were complex lifestyles. They had rituals, they had ceremonies, they had ordeals, they had ascetic practices. Those are the things that you're going to have to introduce. But you have to understand they had specific meaning. The intention was to desire what we really do need, because we don't come in with that programming. And to change the pattern of your body is going to take conscious effort. So it's not going to be as a lot of people in some of the celebrity pseudo spiritual communities are you're already connected. You're already connected to the outside world. You're going to need to do some things. But once you do, then it will translate into a practical guide for highly effective living.
So it's
Does that help?
It does. So it's not too late for anybody to start on the path to spirituality. Like, it's never too late.
Absolutely not.
Too old. It doesn't matter what walk of life you come from or what you do for a living or anything like that. I think some people look at starting a spiritual practice as they have to give up, what they do. They have to give up their lifestyles, if you will, for lack of a better word.
They're probably going to have to employ some changes.
Correct.
Just like what we said. You're going to have to change how you think. You're going to have to change how you breathe. You're going to have to change what you're drinking, what you're eating. And if you're not already, you may have to change how you're exercising. Because, again, none of this is magic. It is all physics. But you're not doing it, for anything other than to experience the changes that it will bring.
Mm-hmm.
Because the physics of spirituality is like attracts like. You can't draw from fear and limitation and expect to be truth and wholeness.
Well,
I'm wondering
if any of our listeners out there might have any questions for you at this point. So I was wondering if we could open up the phone lines and see if we have anybody that might have any questions out there. So listeners, if anybody has a question at this point, feel free to ask Swami.
Hello, and good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You were talking a lot about desire, and I know the subject matter is also ego, and I'm very interested in that because I don't spend a lot of time on ego. In fact, I have a hard time even defining it. But I am clear on desiring the void. I get that. And what I'm wondering is ego more about the desire, as you speak of, or is it more at a basic level, is it more about who we view or how we view ourselves, our self-image? Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I think, your sense of self is your ego. And the whole thing about the concept of annihilation of one's ego, or not having, desires or needs is somewhat of an impossible task. But if you understand that the intention of, these disciplines in their original format was to literally rebirth your body in a different source of sustenance, so that your sense of self would start to expand beyond just seeing yourself as separate. This concept of apotheosis isn't something that people are talking about. This process of going from unconscious awareness to self-conscious awareness to superconscious awareness. And one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of times people mistake a trance state for a true meditative state. You know, that a trance state is where you take a conscious mind that's the size of a quarter and you put it in another coordinate of consciousness. And so you kind of, it's like daydreaming. You know, you lose your sense of self. Whereas a true meditative state is an expansive point of awareness. It's a more inclusive point of identification, that you don't lose your sense of self. Does that help, or?
It does. The one thing, I'm not trying. I'm not part of a religion or that annihilates my ego. You know, I'm not trying to annihilate my ego. I'm trying to really identify it. And
okay.
So you know, so
yeah. Well, that would be mostly aligned with your needs. You know, your essential needs, and also, you know, your desires. Then, of course, your wants, you know, would come under that heading. But the whole intention of a metaphysical or mystical practice is to reconnect to a different source of sustenance that will initiate a progressive cycle, you know, that will give your sense of self an expansion beyond just seeing yourself as separate. And it will actually allow you to become a part of yourself that is eternal, you know, that's more enduring than, you know, the identity that we initially come in with. Does that help, or?
Yeah, that helps a lot. I appreciate it.
So do we have any other questions out there from our listeners? We have a few more moments left that if you have a question for Swami, you could certainly ask him right now. Okay, Swami, I think that's going to do it for our questions from our listeners. So basically you're saying that we all have the desire, or we all have the capability for finding this sense of awareness to get this connection to this thing we call spirit. It can be, I mean, anybody can do this, regardless of where you are in your life at this moment. But you do talk about that there is a procedure and a process, you know, to get there. You had mentioned some of the things. Can you just review those things for us again? You were talking about skillful use of thought and breath and so on. And then what do we do after we employ all those strategies?
Well, one of the things that you know, I mean, trying to oversimplify things and accommodate the quick fix American mentality is not really an option in this model. You know, in order to do it, you're really going to need a complete game plan. You know, one of the things is that we are starting a new Theory 1 class next Tuesday night. You know, because if you understand the magnitude of the science of yoga, that is, practices to initiate this process, and you're going to need a path of action, you're going to need a path of knowledge, you're going to need a path of devotion. And that's, you know, what we can give you in, you know, like an 8-week course, as opposed to, you know, me trying to give you the secret to life right now. Put God first. Mm-hmm. Good luck.
Right. 3 big words, right.
Yeah.
Well, in closing, I would like to invite the listeners out there, you know, visit our website, follow us on Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook. Keep those comments and questions and curiosities coming, because we do enjoy hearing from you, and Swami will respond back. So I want to also let our listeners know, please be sure to tune into our program next week. We're going to be talking about avidya in Kriya Yoga. So, Swami, any final thoughts or comments about our discussion today or of this show next week?
No, I think that'll be it. Namaste.
Great. Well, thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton with Swami Jayananda. Signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.